The Young and the Restless spoilers Saturday's full episodes October 25, 2025. Phyllis Summers had never been a woman easily cornered, but that afternoon in Genoa City, the illusion of control she had carefully built began to crack. The air in her apartment was heavy with silence except for the soft hum of her laptop, its screen glowing with lines of stolen code that shimmered like forbidden treasure. The software before her was a masterpiece, Kane Ashby's most ambitious creation, a revolutionary AI engine rumored to possess predictive capabilities powerful enough to change entire markets. To Kane, it was the culmination of years of work. To Phyllis, it was a weapon, and she had convinced herself she was merely borrowing it to understand its power, not to destroy him. Yet even she knew she was walking a tightrope stretched between brilliance and disaster. When the knock came at her door, it wasn't the gentle tap of a friend. It was sharp, demanding, and unmistakably filled with accusation. Phyllis froze, her pulse quickening as the echo of Kane's voice cut through the stillness. He was here. The moment she opened the door, Kane stood framed in the hallway light, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. His eyes darted past her shoulder toward the laptop on her bed, where the AI software was still open, lines of encrypted data pulsing like a heartbeat. "What did you do?" he demanded, his tone restrained but trembling with anger. Phyllis, ever the actress, tilted her head with calculated innocence, pretending not to understand. "Do?" she echoed, her voice soft and airy. But Kane wasn't fooled. "My tech team just called," he snapped. "Someone hacked our system. My AI prototype is gone. The trace leads back here." For a second, the room felt smaller, closing in on them as if the walls themselves were listening. Phyllis let out a sharp breath and folded her arms, masking her rising panic with indignation. "I thought your system couldn't be hacked," she said smoothly, as though throwing the blame back at him. "Don't you have a list of suspects?" Kane's jaw clenched. "I do," he replied quietly. "And you're at the top." The accusation hung in the air like a blade between them. Phyllis felt the sting of it, though she would never admit it. She stood taller, the defiant glint in her eyes returning like armor. "I can't believe you're talking to me like this," she said, her tone shifting from defensive to wounded. "Do you have any idea how insulting this is?" Kane's expression didn't change, he was past the point of being manipulated by her charm. "Look me in the eye, Phyllis," he said steadily. "And tell me you didn't take it." For the first time, she hesitated. Not out of guilt, Phyllis had long since taught herself how to lie with conviction, but because of the strange tangle of pride and self-preservation tightening around her throat. She had her reasons for what she'd done. She needed leverage, power, and security in a world that had repeatedly stripped her of all three. Kane, however, didn't see strategy, he saw betrayal. "You think you can outsmart everyone," he said coldly. "But this is theft." Meanwhile, elsewhere in Genoa City, Nick Newman was beginning his own interrogation, one that connected in ways none of them yet understood. Sienna Bacall had been on his radar ever since the night of Noah's crash. Her name kept appearing in the background, mentioned by Holden Novak, whispered by employees who claimed she had been seen near the old tech district where Kane's AI servers were stored. Nick met her at Society, his demeanor calm but his questions sharp. He asked about her ties to Noah, her connection to Holden, and her sudden appearance in town after years abroad. Sienna, draped in elegance and ambiguity, smiled faintly and replied that she barely knew Noah, only through mutual acquaintances. But Nick saw the flicker in her eyes, a split-second hesitation that betrayed something deeper. Holden Novak had his own questions for Sienna later that evening. The two met in the dimly lit corner of the club, where old secrets felt safer in the dark. Holden's curiosity was sharper than Nick's. He wasn't asking for justice, he was seeking truth. "How well did you know Noah?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Sienna's answer was too practiced, too neat. "Not well at all," she said, though her gaze drifted somewhere distant. The problem with Sienna was never her words, it was her tone, the subtle tremor that came when she lied. Holden caught it instantly. He knew she was hiding something, and he suspected it wasn't just about Noah. As these conversations unfolded across Genoa City, the threads of deceit began weaving themselves into a larger pattern. Phyllis's tampering with Kane's AI system wasn't just an act of ambition, it had consequences reaching beyond business. Within the stolen software were encrypted records, hidden algorithms that could predict behavioral patterns, financial outcomes, and even security weaknesses. If that information fell into the wrong hands, it could be weaponized against anyone, including the Newmans. Phyllis had no idea that her actions were indirectly linked to the chaos that surrounded Noah's crash, or that Sienna Bacall might already be using fragments of Kane's stolen code to cover her own tracks. Kane, however, wasn't ready to let the confrontation go. As Phyllis continued to deflect, his anger hardened into resolve. "You've done some questionable things before," he said bitterly, "but this time, you've gone too far." Phyllis's laughter was sharp, almost mocking, but there was a strain behind it. "Too far," she retorted. "I've seen people in this town go much further and walk away smiling." Her words were a confession wrapped in defiance. She wanted him to believe she was untouchable, but even as she spoke, a sliver of fear crept into her voice. When Kane left, the room felt colder. Phyllis sat back down, staring at the code on her screen. She could delete it, confess, or dig deeper, and she chose the latter. Her fingers moved quickly across the keys, searching the software's core until she found something that made her stop. There, embedded deep within the AI framework, was a line of hidden data labeled with a familiar name, S. Bacall. For a moment, her pulse froze. Was Sienna involved all along? Across town, Nick replayed the footage from Noah's dashcam on his phone while sitting in his car. The grainy image of the man standing before Noah's car haunted him, but a new thought entered his mind. What if the crash and Kane's stolen AI weren't separate incidents at all? What if someone had orchestrated both to manipulate information, to erase digital traces, or to silence a secret that Noah had stumbled upon? His instincts screamed that Sienna was at the center of it. Meanwhile, Holden couldn't shake the feeling that Sienna's calm demeanor was nothing more than an act. He remembered the way she'd glanced away when he mentioned Noah, the tremor in her voice when she denied knowing him. Holden began making calls to old contacts, tracing her movements from her time overseas. What he found was unsettling: records of her working under aliases, short-term consulting roles with tech firms connected to AI development. Her trail intersected with Kane's company more than once. By midnight, the storm clouds over Genoa City mirrored the growing chaos beneath them. Phyllis sat staring at the name on her screen, torn between fear and fascination. Kane paced his office, trying to salvage his stolen creation while wondering if Phyllis's betrayal was only the surface of something larger. Nick, restless and uneasy, drove past the hospital, checking on Noah before turning toward Sienna's apartment. And Sienna, somewhere in the dark, watched the world unravel exactly as she had planned, her reflection flickering in the glow of her own laptop, the words "access granted" flashing across her screen. In that moment, the city held its breath, unaware that all their fates were now tied to one piece of code, one betrayal, and one woman's determination to rewrite the rules before anyone could stop her. Phyllis Summers sat motionless for a long moment after Kane's threats echoed through the room, a laptop screen still glowing with the stolen code that pulsed like a living heart. Her pulse quickened beneath her calm facade as she calculated her next move. She knew she was caught in a tightening web, but surrender had never been in her nature. So instead of retreating, she did what she did best: she manipulated. "Kane," she began softly, her tone a mixture of reason and indignation, "you're focusing on the wrong enemy. It wasn't me. It was Victor Newman." Kane froze mid-stride, his expression flickering between disbelief and fury. "Victor," he repeated, his voice rising. "That's absurd." But Phyllis pressed on, her voice taking on that persuasive rhythm that had saved her countless times before. "Think about it. Victor's been after your tech division for months. He's been sniffing around your investors, trying to undercut you. Who else would have the resources, or the arrogance, to pull off a breach like this? She watched his jaw tighten, saw the doubt flicker across his face. It was working, not fully, but enough to slow his anger into suspicion. Kane exhaled sharply, pacing before her like a caged animal, torn between his instincts and the possibility that she was telling the truth. "If I find out you're lying to me," he said finally, his tone dropping to something cold and deliberate, "if this is another one of your games, I promise you, Phyllis, you'll regret it." The look in his eyes was not the empty threat of a man lashing out. It was a warning forged in betrayal. And for the first time that night, Phyllis felt something dangerously close to fear. But she couldn't let it show. She lifted her chin, her expression serene, her mind already several steps ahead. "Then I guess you'd better start investigating Victor," she said quietly, watching as Kane stormed out, leaving her alone with the hum of her machine and the faint tremor in her hands. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Los Angeles, the tension unfolding in Genoa City had begun to ripple outward. The rooftop restaurant at the Langham Hotel glowed beneath the California sun, its marble floors and soft music an illusion of calm against the undercurrent of secrets that hung in the air. Kyle Abbott leaned across the table, pointing discreetly toward a corner where Holden Novak was speaking with a woman whose poise was impossible to ignore. "That's her," he said under his breath. "Holden's been meeting her all week." Claire Sinclair followed his gaze, her brow furrowing as she recognized the woman immediately. "That's Sienna Bacall," she said softly. "She runs the nightlight club downtown. She's nice." But there was hesitation in her voice, as if she wasn't entirely sure. Before Kyle could respond, Claire turned to him sharply. "You said you wouldn't bother me," she said, her frustration barely concealed beneath a forced calm. "I told you I needed time, and here you are." Kyle's expression softened, a mixture of guilt and stubbornness flashing in his eyes. "Do you want me to go back to Genoa City then?" he asked. Claire crossed her arms, her voice cool but decisive. "That would be nice." She rose from the table, brushing past him toward Holden and Sienna. Kyle watched, conflicted, before noticing a familiar figure at the edge of the terrace, Nick Newman, his expression grim, scanning the room like a man carrying too much weight. The moment Kyle saw him, his confusion turned to alarm. Nick looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes haunted by something deeper than jet lag. He crossed the room quickly, his presence immediately drawing attention. Claire turned, startled to see him, while Holden's conversation with Sienna froze mid-sentence. "Nick," she asked. But he didn't answer right away. He looked at her, then at Holden, then at Sienna, as if trying to piece together a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. "Noah's been in an accident," he said finally, his voice tight. "He's in the hospital." The news hit the table like a physical blow. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Holden's composure faltered for a moment, though his eyes flickered toward Sienna, as if searching for her reaction. And Sienna, elegant, unreadable Sienna, merely tilted her head, studying Nick with unsettling calm. "I recognize your voice," she said after a pause. "I was the one who called Noah." The words landed like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. Nick's breath caught. "You?" he asked, stepping closer. "How do you know my son?" Sienna smiled faintly, her tone smooth as silk. "He came to my club a few times," she explained. "We talked. He seemed lost. I tried to help." Her eyes flickered with something almost sympathetic, though it felt rehearsed, as if she had practiced this line 100 times. "I was on my way there tonight," she added casually. Nick hesitated, torn between skepticism and desperation for answers. "Then I'll come with you," he said finally. "I need to understand what he was doing there." Sienna's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Of course," she replied. "I'd be happy to show you." When they arrived at the nightlight club later that evening, the city had begun to hum with twilight energy. The club itself was a blend of sophistication and secrecy, dark velvet booths, low jazz, and an air of exclusivity that hinted at hidden dealings. Sienna led Nick inside, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "My husband owns the place," she said conversationally. "Mitch Bacall. He met your son recently, he seemed impressed by him." Nick's brow furrowed. "Impressed," he repeated, uncertain where this was going. "Why was Noah meeting with your husband?" Sienna turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "He was interested in investing," she said smoothly. "He said he wanted to understand the entertainment side of the business." But Nick wasn't convinced. There was something too polished about her story, too convenient. He leaned forward slightly, his tone darkening. "The police told me someone ran Noah off the road," he said quietly. "It wasn't an accident." For the first time, Sienna's smile faltered. Her eyes darted briefly toward the bar before settling back on him. "That's terrible," she murmured, though her voice lacked real surprise. "I had no idea." Nick studied her carefully, watching the subtle movements in her expression, the practiced empathy, the measured breathing. She was lying, or at least withholding something. "If you knew him," he said, "even a little, you must have some idea who'd want to hurt him." Sienna's lips parted as if to respond, but before she could, a figure appeared in the doorway, Holden, his expression tense. "Nick," he called out. "Maybe you should hear me out before you start throwing accusations." The tension between the three of them thickened instantly. Kyle entered moments later, having followed them from the hotel, his eyes darting from Claire to Sienna to Nick. "What's going on here?" he demanded. No one answered right away. The room felt electric, charged with something neither entirely truth nor lie. Nick's jaw tightened as he turned back to Sienna. "You said you were the one who called Noah," he said slowly. "But why? What did you want from him?" Sienna met his gaze evenly now, her earlier pretense replaced by an unsettling calm. "I wanted to warn him," she said quietly. "He was getting involved with people who don't forgive mistakes." Nick felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What people?" he pressed. But she only smiled again, that same controlled, haunting smile that gave nothing away. "Ask Victor," she said softly. "He seems to know everything, doesn't he?" It was a deliberate echo of Phyllis's earlier deflection, and as Nick's confusion deepened, the larger picture began to take shape, a network of deceit that stretched from Genoa City to Los Angeles, linking AI thefts, car crashes, and whispered betrayals into one invisible web. The question was no longer just who hurt Noah, but who among them had been playing all sides from the beginning, and how far they were willing to go to keep their secrets buried. Nick sat across from Sienna in the low, amber-lit corner of the club, the tension between them wound tight as piano notes drifted faintly through the air. The place had emptied out after hours, leaving only the echo of whispered conversations and the faint hum of electricity from the bar lights. He was tired, too tired for games, and his patience was wearing thin. He had flown from Genoa City to Los Angeles chasing answers, and the more he learned, the less sense it all made. "When was the last time you saw my son?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with the authority of a man who had spent his life protecting his family from threats both visible and hidden. Sienna met his gaze without flinching. "The night of the accident," she said quietly. Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Nick leaned back slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "And why did you call him?" Sienna hesitated, her fingers grazing the edge of her wine glass before she set it down. "I needed to ask him about his driver's license," she replied. "There were some issues with the records. I thought he could help clear them up." Nick frowned, his disbelief immediate. "That doesn't make sense," he said flatly. "You call him," he answers, "and then he hangs up in the middle of your sentence? Why?" Sienna blinked, her composure cracking for the first time. I don't know," she stammered softly. He sounded distracted. "I was confused. I thought maybe I said something wrong." Her explanation hung in the air, fragile and incomplete, like a half-written confession. Nick studied her in silence. Her voice trembled just enough to make her sound sincere, but not enough to convince him she wasn't hiding something. Every instinct told him there was more to the story, that the call hadn't been about licenses or confusion, but about something far more dangerous. "If you're lying to me," he said finally, his tone cold but quiet, "I'll find out." Sienna's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me." Across the city, under the soft hum of hospital machinery, another story was unfolding. Claire stepped out of the elevator clutching a small bouquet of white tulips, her hands trembling as she looked around for Sharon. Holden walked beside her, his usual confidence subdued by the solemn atmosphere. Sharon met them in the hallway, her face pale from exhaustion but lit by the fragile light of hope that Noah might soon awaken. "Can I see him?" Claire asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Sharon hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "He's still asleep," she said softly, "but I think he'll know you're here." They entered the room together. The steady beep of Noah's heart monitor filled the silence. His face was calm, almost boyish in sleep, though faint bruises and a small bandage near his temple told the story his memory could not. Claire moved closer to the bed, her eyes welling with tears as she placed the flowers on the table beside him. "Hi, Noah," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's me, Claire." She hesitated before continuing, her words spilling out in a fragile rush. "I was just thinking. When you get better, maybe we could go to London together. I've always wanted to see it. My dad loved it there, he used to tell me about the lights over the river, the music in the streets, how it felt like time stood still." Her voice broke slightly. "I think you'd love it too."